I guess I should start with the line I used to repeat like it was some kind of philosophy. A fake startup is just a beautiful presentation without a real product. At the time, I didn't even think of it as a crime. I told myself it was strategy, positioning, storytelling. Everyone exaggerates in business, right? That's what I believed, what I needed to believe. My name's William. I'm not writing this for sympathy. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm writing it. Maybe because I've replayed that year in my head so many times it feels like it belongs to someone else now. Anyway, this happened about 3 years ago. I was broke, buried under debt from a failed app that actually had a product but no users. Irony, I know. Rent was overdue, my co-founder had already bailed, and I was one final notice email away from moving back in with my parents. That's when I realized something that, at the time, felt like a breakthrough. People don't invest in products. They invest in belief. And belief, as it turns out, is something you can manufacture. Once that idea settled in my head, everything started to feel solvable. I didn't need a working product. I needed something that looked like it worked. Something that made people feel like they were already late to the opportunity. That fear, missing out, that's where I decided to sell. The concept came first. I picked something vague but trendy, AI-powered workflow automation for small businesses. It sounded complex enough that most people wouldn't question the details, but familiar enough to feel believable. I didn't even fully understand what I was pitching at first, which, weirdly, helped. I just mirrored language from other startups and stitched it together until it sounded impressive. Then came the pitch deck. Clean design, bold claims, fake metrics. I spent days crafting graphs that showed user growth that didn't exist. I invented testimonials, complete with stock photos and names that sounded real enough to pass a quick glance. Every slide had one purpose: remove doubt before it could form. Looking back, that's when the line blurred. I stopped thinking, "Is this true?" and started thinking, "Would someone believe this?" The deck wasn't enough. I realized pretty quickly that if anyone got even slightly interested, they'd want to see something. Not code, not infrastructure, just proof that it existed. So I built a fake product. Not from scratch, obviously. I don't code well enough to spin up something convincing that fast. Instead, I used a patchwork of no-code tools, templates, and a front-end shell that looked functional but didn't actually do anything meaningful. Buttons worked, but only in a loop. Inputs gave pre-scripted outputs. It was basically a stage set, convincing from the audience, hollow behind the walls. I even recorded a demo video where everything went perfectly. No bugs, no delays. I edited it like a commercial, tight cuts, upbeat music, confident voiceover. Watching it back, even I felt a flicker of belief. That scared me more than anything. Because if I could forget it was fake for a second, what chance did anyone else have? Once the illusion was solid enough, the next step was people. Not just any people, the right kind. I wasn't going after seasoned investors. That would have been suicide. I needed those in-between types, successful enough to have money, but inexperienced enough to trust a good story. I spent nights digging through startup forums, LinkedIn profiles, angel investing groups. You'd be surprised how many people openly advertise that they're looking for early-stage opportunities. Translation: they want to feel like insiders. I built a list. Names, backgrounds, what they'd invested in before, even small personal details. Where they studied, what they posted about. It felt invasive, but I told myself it was just research. That's what real founders do, right? Then I tailored my approach. Each message personalized just enough to feel genuine. Casual, confident, never desperate. I made it seem like they were being given access to something exclusive. A few ignored me. Most didn't. And then, some replied. That's when things stopped being theoretical. The first reply I got, I remember it way too clearly. A guy named Daniel, mid-30s, ex-corporate, recently turned angel investor. His message was short. Looks interesting. Do you have time this week to chat? I stared at it for a full minute before responding. My hands were actually shaking. Up until then, everything had been preparation, theory, a kind of controlled illusion. But this was real. A real person, real money, real consequences. I almost backed out right there. Instead, I said yes. I scheduled the call 2 days later, giving myself just enough time to rehearse every possible question he might ask. I memorized my own fake metrics like they were facts. I practiced saying things casually, like I wasn't reciting lines. When the call finally started, Daniel was relaxed, friendly. That somehow made it worse. Because I realized I wasn't tricking some faceless system. I was about to lie directly to someone who trusted me enough to listen. The moment his camera turned on, I felt exposed. Daniel was sitting in what looked like a home office, bookshelf behind him, a coffee mug, normal life stuff. Meanwhile, I had carefully staged my background to look startup-ish. Minimalist, a whiteboard with vague diagrams. All part of the act. He started with small talk, which somehow made everything more tense. I kept thinking, does he see through this? But he didn't. Or at least, he didn't show it. Then we got into the pitch. I walked him through the deck like I'd done it 100 times. Problem, solution, market size, traction. I spoke confidently, even when I was saying things I'd completely fabricated. And the weird part? The more I talked, the more natural it felt. He nodded a lot. Asked questions, good ones, but not impossible ones. I had answers ready for most of them. The ones I didn't, I deflected. We're still refining that. Early data suggests. Stuff like that. At one point he said, "This is really promising." And instead of relief, I felt something colder. Because it was working. By the end of the call, there was a pause. You know the kind, where both people are pretending to think, but something's already decided. Daniel leaned back, took a sip of his coffee, and said, "I'd be interested in coming in early. Nothing huge, just to get involved." That was it. That was the moment. I should have hesitated. I should have slowed things down, maybe even walked it back. Instead, I nodded like this was completely normal. Like people said yes to me all the time. We talked numbers. Not massive, low 5 figures. Enough to matter to him, but not enough to trigger serious scrutiny. I told him we were closing a small round quickly, that a few others were already in. That part was a lie too, but it created urgency. He didn't push back much. We agreed to follow up with paperwork. I promised to send everything over the next day. When the call ended, I just sat there. I had crossed a line. Not in theory. Not in planning. In reality. The second I got off that call, the adrenaline didn't fade, it shifted. Before, I was nervous about getting someone interested. Now I had someone ready to send money, and suddenly the pressure was different. He expected structure. Legitimacy. Proof beyond a slick presentation. So I built it. I downloaded startup legal templates, safe agreements, term sheets, documents I barely understood. I tweaked names, adjusted numbers, formatted everything to look clean and official. I even registered a basic company online just to have something real attached to it. A name on paper goes a long way. Every detail mattered. Email signatures, a domain that matched the company name, a simple website that echoed the pitch deck. Consistency was everything. If one piece looked off, the whole thing could collapse. Daniel emailed me the next day, polite but direct. "Whenever you're ready." That line stuck with me. Because I realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't rushing me. I was rushing myself. I sent the documents late at night, like that somehow made it less real. Clean PDFs, professional tone, everything in place. I triple-checked every detail, not for accuracy, but for believability. Then I hit send and just sat there, staring at my inbox. Daniel replied the next morning. No major questions. Just a couple of clarifications, minor stuff. I answered quickly, confidently. Too confidently, probably. Then came the message. Looks good. I'll wire the funds today. I remember reading that over and over again. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like something irreversible had just been set in motion. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. The money was there. Real money. Not numbers in a pitch deck, not projections, actual funds sitting in an account I controlled. For a second, everything went quiet. No excitement, no celebration. Just this heavy awareness of what I'd done. And then, almost immediately, a new thought pushed in. Now you have to keep this going. Getting the money wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a much harder part. Because now there was expectation. Updates, progress, momentum. I couldn't just disappear. That would have been obvious. Suspicious. So I doubled down. I started sending weekly investor updates. Carefully written, optimistic but not unrealistic. We onboard 12 new users. Early feedback is strong. None of it was real, but it was paced in a way that felt believable. Too much success would raise questions. Too little would raise concern. I even scheduled another call with Daniel to walk him through new features. I reused parts of the demo, slightly modified. Added small bugs, on purpose to make it feel authentic. Weirdly, imperfection made it more convincing. But maintaining the lie was exhausting. Every message, every call, it all had to align. I couldn't contradict myself. I kept notes just to remember what I'd already said. And the worst part? The more effort I put into sustaining it, the more it started to feel like something real. Like I wasn't faking a company anymore. I was trapped inside it. It didn't fall apart all at once. That's the thing. There wasn't some dramatic moment where everything collapsed. It started small, tiny inconsistencies I didn't notice until it was too late. Daniel began asking more detailed questions. Not aggressive, just curious. Things like user retention, churn rate, specifics about how the AI model was trained. Before I could get away with broad answers. Now he wanted depth. So I improvised. And that's where it started slipping. I gave one explanation in an email, then a slightly different version on a call. Nothing huge, but enough to create friction. I could see it in his face, just a second longer pause than usual, a slight narrowing of the eyes. Then he asked if he could speak to one of our users. That hit harder than anything. I stalled, said we need permission, privacy concerns, all that. He nodded, but I could tell, something had shifted. For the first time since this started, I felt it clearly. Not control. Not confidence. Exposure. After that call, I went into full damage control mode. Not to fix the truth, just to patch the illusion. I convinced myself that if I could just smooth things over, by a little more time, everything would stabilize again. So I tried to create what he asked for. I reached out to a friend, well, more like an acquaintance, and asked if he could pretend to be a user for a quick call. I kept it vague, said it was for a demo, nothing serious. He hesitated but eventually agreed after I promised it wouldn't take long. I prepped him like crazy. Sent him talking points, fake use cases, even phrases to repeat. It felt absurd, like directing a low-budget play where the stakes were way too high. At the same time, I updated our internal numbers to match the newer story I'd been telling. Everything had to align again. But the more I adjusted things, the more fragile it all felt. Like stacking glass on glass. One wrong move, one unexpected question. And everything would shatter. The call with my user was supposed to fix everything. Instead, it did the opposite. At first, it went okay. My friend followed the script, said the right things, described the product like we rehearsed. Daniel listened, nodded, but he wasn't the same anymore. He wasn't leaning in with excitement. He was watching. Then came the question I didn't prepare for. He asked something simple, but specific, about how the product handled a certain edge case. My friend paused. Just for a second. But it was enough. He looked at me, almost instinctively, like he was waiting for help. That was the moment. Daniel noticed it too. I could see it in his expression, this shift from curiosity to realization. He didn't interrupt, didn't accuse. He just let the silence stretch a little longer than normal. We wrapped the call shortly after. No confrontation. No drama. But as soon as it ended, I knew. The illusion hadn't just cracked this time. It had been seen through. He didn't call me out right away. That almost made it worse. A few hours after the call, I got an email. Calm, professional, but colder than anything he'd said before. He listed a few inconsistencies he'd noticed, differences in metrics, unclear technical explanations, the awkward moment during the user call. Then the line that hit hardest. I'd like full transparency before we continue. Not if. Continue. I stared at that email for a long time. I could have doubled down. Tried to explain everything away, patch it again like I had before. Part of me wanted to. It had worked so far. But something in me was tired. Tired of remembering lies. Tired of performing. Tired of that constant edge of being exposed. I replied the next morning. Short. Direct. No spin. I told him the truth. Not every detail, but enough. That the product wasn't real. That the metrics were fabricated. That I'd gone too far trying to make something out of nothing. He didn't respond immediately. But I didn't expect him to. He did respond eventually. Not angry, not emotional, just final. He said he appreciated the honesty, but the trust was gone. He asked for his money back and mentioned possible legal steps if I didn't cooperate. I returned it. Every cent. It wiped me out completely, but at that point, I wasn't thinking about money anymore. Just consequences. Nothing legal ever came from it. Maybe he decided it wasn't worth the effort. Maybe my confession mattered. I don't know. What I do know is that I got off easier than I deserved. But that doesn't mean I walked away unchanged. For a long time after, I couldn't look at anything related to startups without feeling sick. Pitch decks, funding rounds, even casual conversations about ideas, it all reminded me of how easy it was to cross that line. Here's the truth. It doesn't feel like a crime when you start. It feels like opportunity. Until one day, you realize you've built something fake. And the only real thing left is what it turned you into.